him, not a lot going on there, to be honest. And some of the comments that were thrown around, if he is a white supremacist, and I don't know that to be true, I don't know what is superior about him. Doesn't look like much. And to be honest, I'm sure he knew he wasn't much. But the line right now, as I understand it, the line right now is, and I don't know what goes through people's head, that because he visited these massage parlors, there was some immoral things I think he believed going on, and they all had to be killed because of it, I guess. Personally, I have my own thoughts on the outside that this is kind of a hyper-religious thing too. Again, anytime you have these extremes, anytime you have, people with these way out, it's the gun again. Again had the gun. Now, I'm still waiting for all the investigation to come out about how he got the gun, where he got the gun from. And oddly enough, he was arrested and taken unharmed. And I think being a white kid has a lot to do with that as well. It's a horrible, horrible, tragic moment, and yeah, I don't know where you go from here with this. Fortunately, they caught him. Hopefully, he'll spend the rest of his days in a small cell, having to think about what he's done. That doesn't give any comfort to the families. Doesn't give any comfort to the victims in this. But man, what is wrong with us as a society? It is just crazy, and I just wanted to start off with that today. I mean, our thoughts go out to the families of the victims and the people who are affected by this, and just kind of a moment to go, calm down. If you've got problems, talk to somebody. If you have addiction problems, which I know that's what this is going to turn into. Oh, we need to cut down on all the online porn, and we need to cut down on all that stuff because a couple of people are unable to handle it. A very, very bizarre time. I did find something very interesting today, and again, now remember, going back to the American Rescue Plan, not one Republican, not one voted for the American Rescue Plan. Not one, yet you had some already touting, hey, look what we got. I looked to Ohio, where the Attorney General there, Dave Yost, evidently is suing the Biden administration. And if I'm getting this right, they're suing over the fact that the administration has given aid to states, but they're limiting what they can use that money on. And one of the things I guess that it does is it limits a state's ability to use the money that they're getting to help, pay for education and all the other stuff. Prevents them from using money to offset tax cuts. So you can't take the money and then go, oh, hey, corporate America, here's some welfare. That's not what it's meant for. It's not meant to hand out money to your rich donors. It's meant to help people in your state, to help pay the bills, keep people on the payroll, keep services going, keep education moving, that kind of stuff. Now, evidently, Yost is arguing that it's too broad of a requirement because personally, I think during this moment, there should be no more tax cuts for big business. No more tax cuts in this moment. If you need the help, if you need the resources to come from the federal government to shore up your budgets, this is the last time you go, oh, hey, we're going to cut taxes so that we give more to the very wealthy. That's insane. But he's filed a lawsuit and said that the mandates gives the state a choice. They can have either the badly needed federal funds or their sovereignty and their sovereign authority to set tax policy usurped. But they cannot have both. And I don't think they should. But it's interesting to me that this is one of the first lawsuits out of the bag, which is, well, we've got all this money now. And we don't really know what to do with it, because evidently there are no homeless people. There are no hungry people in Ohio. There are no schools that are crumbling. There's none of that stuff. Evidently, everything is flush. Everything's wonderful. And I guess the first thing on their mind is tax cuts. And I'm not going there with you. And I'm glad that they put some restriction in there. To be honest, I was thrilled when I read this. Because one of my fears was that this was going to happen, that we were going to give all of this resource to some states, especially red states with Republican governors. Yes, Ohio, I'm looking at you. And they were going to do just this. Interesting. Very, before most people even got their stimulus checks in their bank account, Ohio is looking at, I guess, how they can give it away to the very wealthy. It's really kind of crazy to me. And it's one of those things where you just go, this is why Republicans are so bad at governing. This is why their policy is so lacking. There's nothing there. They've got one tool in the box. They've got one club in the bag, one arrow in the quiver, one thing. And that's every answer that they come up with is tax cuts, starve government, make government so small we drag it in the bathtub and drown it in the bathtub. And I look at this, and what's frustrating is we know this doesn't work. It hasn't worked in the last 40 years. It's not magically going to work now. It didn't work during the Trump years. It didn't work during the Bush years. Didn't work during the Reagan or the first Bush's years. What's going to work, and why I'm excited about the direction our economy is going in, is that we're saying, look, there's government demand. We need to have a robust bit of demand put into the economy to get people back to work. Prime the pump, what Trump said he coined. Except, never mind that, that guy from, back in the 40s, that Keynes guy. Never mind him. But for me, this is that moment where you go, the economy is going to do better under Biden because there is going to be government demand. And it's not just government demand for the sense of, for the sake of demand. It's stuff that we need. I had someone, rail on me that, there's a bunch of wasteful spending and, we've given people all this money. And I go, well, yeah, we've given people money. And that's going to help them shore up their lives. It's going to help them maybe pay their back rent, maybe get a couple of days ahead. Maybe the survey they did a couple years ago will change from 40% of the people not being able to come up with $400 or 60% of the people not being able to come up with $1,000 in an emergency. Maybe we cut those numbers down. Maybe people do have a little cushion. Maybe people then feel a little bit better. And maybe then they do go out and they do other things. And I know this isn't about COVID. Yeah, this is. This is about getting us through this moment and letting people kind of stay away from each other for a bit. But it's frustrating to see these Republicans who are, again, they come back to, they didn't vote for it. They didn't want it. There's nothing in it they believe in. They were very clear about that. Now saying, hey, well, we got all this money. We're going to use it the way. No. You don't get to not vote for it and then say how it's going to be used. So for me, it's going to be interesting to see how our court system rules on this, because it was clear. Congress made a clear choice. We do not believe that this should be something that is offsetting tax cuts. It's a horribly stupid idea. Because guess what? The very well-to-do, they did really well so far. I forget which organization came up with the numbers, but the number being thrown around is about $1.3 trillion that our billionaire class has pocketed since the beginning of this pandemic. Cool, 1.3 T. Little, I don't even have you say 1.3 mil, that sounds, trill just doesn't get it for me. because we just jumped right on past Bill. I mean, let that sink in. $1.3 trillion they pocketed. Their wealth went up during this pandemic while millions of people across this country are falling behind. Falling behind on their rent, falling behind on their bills. It's terrible. So I'm a supporter of this American Rescue Plan because it is going to get money where it's supposed to be. And if it does help people a little bit get ahead, I'm okay with that too. Because for way too long, we've been making sure that corporate America and the very wealthy have been getting welfare. And I go back to the Tax Cuts and Job Act, Trump's signature accomplishment, which, interestingly enough, $1.9 trillion in handouts to who? The very wealthy. All of us got a couple of pennies. It a little bit down here, but they're taking that away slowly because after a couple of years, it all sunsets. But those corporate tax cuts, permanent. Tax cuts for the very wealthy, permanent. That little bit, that enticement for you and I, not so much. That little bit that we get, not much. And that's how they get you in. They sucker you in with the, here's the introductory offer. And then you end up, as we're going to, paying for it down the road. So for me, this moment is one of those key moments in making sure that the people at the bottom get help first. And if there's a little excess there, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the person at the bottom getting a little bit because I do know that they're going to use it and it's going to benefit the broader economy. That's going to be jobs for people, that kind of demand that we need to circulate through an economy. Because if you got working class folks in my neighborhood who can afford to spend a little bit more, that's going to help create jobs in my neighborhood. It's going to help those small businesses who need the work. This is not a bad thing. And for all the messaging that I've gotten from people, the right-wing talking points, it's a bunch of bunk. I literally had someone tell me that, well, it's not going to actually stimulate the economy. Goldman Sachs, Goldman Sachs, they beg to differ. The outlooks for this year are just blasting. They're looking at an 8% growth rate this year. That is incredible. And the reverberation effect from this, I think is really important. And lastly, this segment, I can't. This is one of those weird things to me. We had on January 6th people who attacked our Capitol, attacked our democracy, went in with the intent of stopping the vote from being counted, and a president being certified. Police officers died. Our Capitol was desecrated, and evidently a majority of people in the country want an independent investigation into voter fraud. What's interesting to me is in the areas where they've done extensive investigations, they found nothing. Texas spent 20,000 hours looking for stuff and came up with like 16 different wrong addresses. They found nothing. And there were 100 lawsuits? And a lot of them before Trump appointees, they found nothing. And what's amazing to me is I come back to Trump was a master at hammering on a point, and still is. Look, he was on TV the other day, singing the same old tune. That we need to have the election should have been overturned. I was robbed. I was told. When I was a kid, you were called a poor sport. You were called a loser for that. Look, it's one thing to lose. It's another thing to continue to constantly whine about it, especially when there was nothing there. And he did exactly, especially here in Pennsylvania, what I predicted even before a ballot was cast. Because you knew that people who were going to vote for him were going to show up on election day, and that night he was going to have a massive lead. And he did, 600,000 votes. And then the other side got to vote and have their votes counted when they started opening envelopes. that lead started to dwindle, and day after day after day, it went down and down and down until he lost. It's that simple. But I'll tell you, I do want a comprehensive investigation into our system, which is why we need H.R. 1. We need legislation to fix the things that are broken. We have too much money in our politics. We've got way too many rules in states that block people from being able to vote. It's clear that our southern states and our Republican-led states want to limit people's access to the ballot boxes, where I'm saying, if you're a citizen, you have the right to vote, and you should vote your conscience, and I will fight for your right to vote, no matter who you vote for. But this, again, is all the politics of the moment, and where the media machine and the money machine is pushing us. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk a little bit about the DNI report on, well, what did Russia do? What didn't they do? All of that. Stick around. Right back after this.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1960. That was the day 5 Italian immigrant workers were killed in Toronto, Ontario, in what is known as the Hogs Hollow tragedy. Referred to as sand hogs, workers sought to connect a pumping station to the water distribution network. They were building a water main in a tunnel under the Don River. The project was already far behind schedule and over budget. Workers were welding in a compression chamber when smoke began to overwhelm the main shaft. Some workers made it out. Firefighters were prevented from releasing water into the tunnel to extinguish the fire over concerns that it would cause a collapse. In addition, there was no backup safety equipment at street level. The tragedy shed light on the appalling wage and working conditions immigrant workers faced just outside the city's borders. The persistent public outcry prompted exposés and investigations that revealed just how bad conditions were. It was truly a tale of two cities. Within the city, union requirements guaranteed breaks and enforcement of safety regulations. But just outside, it was a different story. According to Jamie Bradburn, who wrote for the Toronto Historicist in 2010, workers on suburban projects faced conditions that included lack of proper sanitation, poor safety inspections, illegal withholding of vacation pay, unpaid overtime, checks that often bounced, and groundless threats of deportation. The coroner's inquest determined that callous management, incompetent foremen, inexperienced workers, a disorganized rescue, and inefficiency at the Department of Labor caused the disaster. Though no criminal charges were ultimately laid, the sacrifice of the 5 men at Hogs Hollow brought about improvements in the conditions that had led to their demise.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So according to the Associated Press, the Russian Foreign Ministry is recalling their ambassador to the U.S. Evidently, they're calling this person back for a consultation. I'm not quite sure what that means, but tension's a little high right now, especially after the report that has come out from our director of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence stating that, well, what we already knew, Vlad and the gang were back in 2020, and they were on the side of Trump again. I'm here to share some thoughts on what this means by pulling back their ambassador and a little bit about the DNI report. I've asked our good friend Olga Lautman to come talk with us. Olga is an expert researcher on Russia and the Ukraine. Olga, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thank you.
So what does this mean? The foreign ministry has said they're pulling back this ambassador. What does that mean?
Well, starting yesterday, since the comments that came out with Biden confirming what we all know, that Putin is a killer, the Kremlin has been freaking out. I mean, they have sanctions coming. There are several packages of sanctions in the work. And their media, I mean, since overnight last night, has been on overdrive of propaganda and discussing the sanctions. And then suddenly they decided to recall the ambassador. Who knows what it means? Probably he'll have an unpleasant talk that his job failed of keeping Trump in.
Yeah, well, possibly that. But, I look at this and, this is what we knew for the last 4 years. What now we're finding out from the office of the director of national intelligence. What we already knew. Does this move the needle any, or does this keep us completely separate still? And because I still have conservatives who tell me, "Oh, it's all a hoax. You can't believe any of it. None of it's real."
No, I mean, look, we've had every single intelligence agency from 2016 during the 2016 election when they came out with a report that Russia was interfering in our elections until now confirmed that Russia has been interfering in our elections. And look, they helped install Trump in 2016. Come 2020, they've had 4 years of Kremlin-friendly agenda being pushed through. So now, obviously they worked hard to keep Trump in, but this time they already had people on the inside. So they used, Giuliani, Manafort, and the rest of Trump's cronies to assist in helping, carry out this smear against Biden. And I was covering it. I mean, we spoke last time about this. I was covering it as it was unfolding in Ukraine. I had sources there who were telling me, that of things that were upcoming, of leaks that were going to come, videos, whatnot. And I mean, we knew this was Russian intelligence created crap. Giuliani knew what this was. I mean, it was basically a partnership between the White House and the Kremlin to keep Trump in office. And now with this ODNI report, some in media, are trying to paint this like Giuliani was unwitting. He didn't know what was happening. Of course he knew what was happening. He's been dealing in that region for a few decades.
Yeah, I mean, he's been dealing with the Russians and the Iranians as well. I mean, he was involved with the MEK, and that never seemed to bother the Republican Party.
Yeah, absolutely. He was involved with them, and even with Turkey. I mean, so he's been dealing with this the criminal aspect of that world for a few decades. I mean, and he is the one who flew over. It wasn't Russian agents who contacted him. He is the one who flew over. They have mutual friends between Derkach and Trump and Giuliani. They have a few mutual friends, and Trump actually attempted to do business with one of them over a decade ago. So, I mean, he flew over there. He brought the conspiracy laden OAN crew to Ukraine. He's the one who went there, so, and he kept going back. And then even after the report, our intelligence agencies last summer sanctioned Derkach and warned of an attempt to smear Biden and that the Russians are interfering in our elections, Giuliani continued with the propaganda. Then with the last time I think we spoke was the 17 laptops that were being found everywhere. I mean, so he knew exactly what he was doing. He's a co-conspirator, and my only question is why he's still walking free and all the people involved. I mean, Nunes's aide flew to meet with Derkach's people in Europe. There were so many of them involved in this for a few years, and apparently there still has been no accountability for this.
And it doesn't seem like there's going to be. I mean, okay, we got this report, and it did confirm what I think most of us already believed and understood to be reality. And as you said, the right media is trying to paint Giuliani as kind of inept and I didn't know any better. When I don't believe that for a second. He was one of the most sharp prosecutors. Took down the mob. I don't think he went into this not knowing. I don't believe that for a second.
Absolutely, and like I said, these are his associates. These are Manafort's associates. One of the Russian agents, Telizhenko, who was at the center of this, recently gave an interview like a few weeks ago, saying that it was Manafort's associate Artemenko who set up the meeting between Giuliani and Derkach. So, I mean, Manafort's hand, from the back was involved in this. And absolutely, I mean, they all knew what they were doing. They did everything they could to stay in power, up to including causing a terrorist attack on our capital to stop, Biden being certified. So they knew what they were doing every step of the way, and they helped every step of the way.
Any faith in Merrick Garland to dig into this? Any faith that that the Biden administration will want to push this, or do you think this is another moment of let sleeping dogs lie and we've got bigger things to do and we'll just move on and let it go?
I mean, from now, like I said, if you or I had this many meetings with Russian agents, or if we even did 1% of what happened, we would have been, had a visit by FBI, or like even in Bannon's case, threatening execution on government officials, like Secret Service. As of now, I haven't seen anything, but I mean, hopefully, as things become more clear, hopefully, Garland will pursue this because, just because Biden won, we basically were given like a 3.5 year, grace period to keep our democracy and get things right. Because if these people are not held accountable, they will come back 2024. You see what is happening with the voting lawsuits. I mean, they're doing everything to seize back power. So if people are not held accountable for these crimes, one, we're not going to repair our image on the world stage because, then our talk of law and order can go right out the window if you have criminals, collaborating with Russian agents to take down our democracy.
Yeah, I give you credit for thinking we've got 3.5 years. I'm thinking maybe a year and a half at most. To get us into the beginning of the 2022 and the midterm election, things have got to get done and people have got to be held accountable. Because my fear is that this isn't going to go away. They're not going to stop because we're not going to address it. We're not going to pass legislation that's going to hold them accountable. Or HR 1, I believe, is dead. I don't believe it's going to get through. Which means that in 2022, all of the shenanigans that they're doing in states across the country to limit people's access to the ballot box is going to return, the House and the Senate probably back to Republicans, and we're going to be fighting from behind until 2024.
Yeah, no, I absolutely am in agreement with you, and that's why it's so important to hold people accountable because, I mean, they'll make the next person think twice before betraying America. Right now, I mean, you basically can go work with foreign intelligence to attack your country, and that's it. And, nothing happens.
That's
there's
incredible.
no accountability. So, absolutely. I mean, this cannot be swept under the rug. This is too big. And it's not going away. This is not one of those scandals that, happened and you sweep it under the rug and that's it. And it disappears and that's that. Here, the players are still active. I mean, we have white supremacists who possibly, most likely, were assisting the insurrectionists. Still in Congress. I mean, how is that possible in a democracy that we have people who helped the insurrectionists commit a terrorist attack? I mean, there were reports of a few of the Congress people even walking a few of the insurrectionists through the Capitol the day before. I mean, how are they in office?
That's an excellent question. But for me, it comes back to why. I look at Giuliani, who did have, a stellar career. I was not a fan, but he was viewed as a very good mayor. I know people who live in New York who don't believe that, but still, he was viewed a good mayor. He got through 9/11. He was a prosecutor that took on the mob. He had a very high reputation. And then this. It brings me back to why Devin Nunes, why Ron Johnson going to Moscow on the 4th of July, why all of these contacts, why. And I have to go back to that, when the DNC was hacked and all that information was let out in the public, that the RNC was hacked as well. So what's being held over their heads? That's where my mind goes. Is that too conspiratorial?
Not at all. I mean, the Kremlin is known. That's one of the oldest KGB tactics, is to collect compromise on people to use it at a future date when they see, the person can be of value to them. And it's a combination of that and money. I mean, the Kremlin pays well, and many people are willing to betray the country for the money. And that is why I'm a big advocate of cutting the money flow. There is way too much dirty blood money flowing through our campaigns, flowing through real estate, flowing through K Street with all the lobbyists. And until we cut the money flow from the Kremlin, I mean, we're going to be in danger, and we're going to be at risk of being under attack, because the Kremlin is using their money to buy it's not even with the United States, it's for the West in general. They're using the money to buy politicians and to buy people of influence. I mean, look at Schroeder from Germany, who is one of their, main cheerleaders and assisting in the Nord Stream project. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be done. I'm very hopeful with Biden, because it looks like he's taking steps to focus on kleptocracy, on money laundering. And two, like I said, I mean, overnight it began, and the Russian media and the Kremlin is freaking out over the sanctions that are coming. There are behind the scenes moves happening right now, and then with the Biden comments. So, I mean, Putin right now, he had his 4 years of fun attacking America, and now he's going to get a good lesson of what it is to attack America, and they're worried.
No, as they should be. But what I get, and this is the weird thing for me, because I have some, the most patriotic of conservative listeners who will wave their flags and all that, but are 100% behind Trump, don't believe a bit of this about Russia, but they'll turn around and say, well, that's because it doesn't matter because the Chinese are backing Joe Biden. And one, it's an idiotic statement, but I've heard it so many times.
Yeah.
Any reality in that world?
I mean, no, not at all. And I mean, they're so quick to pin China to Biden. Yet they don't even discuss the fact that Trump paid more taxes to China than to America. He paid $750 in taxes a year, and in China, I think he paid like $20,000 in taxes per year. So, I mean, absolutely not. No. This is, again, Russia, and Russia's behind those talking points. They started this, propaganda was circling around and being pushed in the right last year, attaching China to Joe Biden and, to deflect from them.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And that's it. Yeah, no, there's absolutely not. I mean, we all know who is attacking us. We know who hacked us. Well, that was the SolarWinds was one of the biggest cyber attacks in, I think, our history. And then following that, last month in France, they experienced a huge cyber attack that was similar to SolarWinds. So, I mean, we all know who's behind this,
Yeah.
And that's it. And as far as conservatives, I mean, that's the problem. That again, we're like stuck in two echo chambers where we see reality and we know that, like, Putin is a killer, that Putin invaded countries, that he attempts assassinations on his opposition, whereas they are being fed these conspiracies and they're not getting, the truth of what it is. So they have this favorable view of Putin. Never in my life did I think in America I would see, so many Putin loyalists. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you wouldn't even survive there for like a week, nonetheless live there and, and have the freedom to say whatever you want. So, I mean, it's a big problem, and we really, really need to address even the disinformation aspect, because that's not going away either.
Yeah. Last question I've got for you, because, obviously, in looking at the fact that they've pulled back this ambassador, I'm sure more is coming. What are you paying attention to over the next couple of weeks to give us an indication of how you think this is going to play out?
I'm paying attention to their moves regionally, to see how far they're going to push the boundaries. Because today, even on one of their main propaganda shows, they even said oh, Biden attacked our president, so now we have the right to invade and take Ukraine back.
Is that where we're going? Back to beating up on Ukraine.
Exactly. And Georgia. Georgia is a huge thing, because the SVR, which is very rare for them, the SVR is one of their intelligence agencies, and normally they release press releases on U.S. interfering internally, they accuse us all the time. But this time they just released a press release warning U.S. not to interfere in Georgia. And we're not even in Georgia right now. There's political chaos in Georgia, and Russia has their sights set on Georgia.
Obviously, something we've got to most certainly keep an eye on. Olga,
Yep.
I hope you'll come back and keep us up on what's going on. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great stuff. Our good friend Olga Lautman. Make sure you check out her website, olgalautman.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1890. That was the day the Executive Council of the American Federation of Labor decided that the Carpenters Union should lead a national campaign for the 8-hour workday. The cry, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will, had been on the lips of working people for more than 20 years. The fight for a fair workday had gained momentum in the mid-1880s. But in 1886, the Haymarket tragedy had taken its toll on the cause. When an unknown person threw a bomb at a workers' rally in Chicago, government officials used it as a pretext to clamp down hard against the labor movement. The decision by the American Federation of Labor to pick back up the call for the 8-hour day revitalized this workers' campaign. The choice of the carpenters to lead the way made sense. As skilled craftsmen, their labor would not be easily replaced. This gave them the leverage to stand up and demand an 8-hour workday. Their president, P.J. McGuire, was also a vocal supporter of reducing the long hours required of so many workers. In 1890, he said, "We are not a narrow, selfish trade organization entirely for ourselves. We have been and always will be ready to do our share in the general labor movement, whether it be to help the poorest or the highest paid worker." That May, 53,000 carpenters from 208 locals took part in 141 strikes. As a result, their actions saw gains in more than 30 cities as they won the 8-hour day. In many more, they won a 9-hour workday. The movement helped to strengthen the Carpenters Union and to continue the fight for better wages, hours, and conditions. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you may remember, it's been a couple of months since we talked about this, the fact that the state, there's talk of consolidating some of the state universities. As you know, Pennsylvania owns 14 colleges and universities across the state. The PASHE system is is the jewel of education, I think, in the country. There have been lots of people who say, no, we need to sell off some, consolidate some, do this, do that. Well, the crisis that we're in, the pandemic, seems to be an opportunity for some to do what they've wanted to do for some time. And as I understand, right now there's talk of consolidating Lock Haven University with Bloomsburg and Mansfield University, which means there's going to be a lot of people losing their jobs. And I've got a couple of folks here to share some thoughts on what's going on and also what the reaction is. I've got Dr. Matt Girton here to talk with us. He is the chairperson of the communications department. I've got Professor Pat Campbell. He is the chairperson of the sports study department, and also Shawn Odell, who is the president of AFSCME Council 13's Local 2360. Guys, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure.
So let's start with you, Dr. Girton. Lay this out for me. What's going on at this moment? What's the talk right now?
Well, the one thing that they're talking about here is this chancellor is looking to consolidate because he talks about we're at a fiscal crisis. No one doubts the fact that there are some financial issues here, and that's been the result of decades, frankly, of disinvestment from public higher education. Back in the 80s, in the times that I was in school, we funded at about 75%. The state funded public higher ed, the tuition cost for students. Now that's down below 25%. So it's been this inexorable slide. That's why we find ourselves here right now. One of the reasons we find ourselves. So the chancellor's answer to this has been to, use that corporate speak of right size us through what's called retrenchment. So basically terminating faculty lines in addition to consolidation. And so what he's looking for in terms of consolidation is to find efficiencies. Well, that's all well and good, but it's been shown before that when you merge schools, you don't save any money. The example of this is Georgia, where they merged 14 schools into 7. And when they merged Georgia State, one example with Georgia Perimeter, they only saved 0.5% of their budget. When they merged Armstrong State with Georgia State, they actually lost enrollment. They have lost 195 positions. They have now an alumni group that's saying, unmerge my school. So really it has been, I'm looking for examples of where this worked. I haven't found one.
Yeah, well, everything works on paper. When we draw it out, like when I was a football coach, every play scored a touchdown, even if it was, for 4th and 99, it still worked. But again, like I said, everything on paper. Now there's the reaction to this is obviously people are mobilizing and coming together. And Shawn, I understand that there's a rally coming up on March 20th of AFSCME members, of APSCUF members, of people to say we don't want this. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. This coming Saturday at 10 o'clock in Lock Haven at Triangle Park. And AFSCME and APSCUF and students and community members will all be gathering to voice our concern about the chancellor's plan and to let people know that this is happening, because not everybody knows. I mean, the chancellor is talking this big story of how wonderful this is going to be for the students, for the universities, and we really think that it's not going to be that at all. We think, in fact, it's going to have the opposite effect, that it's going to be devastating to the university, to the students, and to the communities and the people who rely on Lock Haven University to feed their families. So
just so I'm getting this clear, Lock Haven University will be no more. Is this what's being proposed? And they're just going to merge them into the other two? Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, not exactly, but sort of.
Yeah, there will be a new name. Right now, the state system has hired a branding company out of Cleveland, Ohio, to give us a name or to put names out there. So effectively, this would be a consolidation. This would be a merger, takeover, whatever you want to call it.
So out of the 3 schools, we're going to come up with 2 new names, or will it be? Because I'm kind of confused at what their plan is. I think a lot of people are confused at what the plan is. So out of these 3 will be two new names, or 2 of the same 3 names. How is that playing out?
There'll be one name for the 3 schools. There'll be 3 campuses, one name. And there will also be a consolidation that's planned or proposed in the West. That would be Clarion, California, and Edinburgh. So really the way we see this is it's sort of a slippery slope.
No, it's absolutely. This sounds crazy to me, but again, never let a good crisis go to waste. That's why I'm going to go to you, Pat or Peter, Professor Peter Campbell, chairperson of the sports study department there at Lock Haven. You guys have a town hall meeting scheduled for March 30th, as I understand. Tell me what you guys are looking to do there.
Yeah, we have it scheduled Tuesday, March 30th, 7 o'clock to 8:30. We're looking to answer questions of faculty, coaches, students, local business community, local politicians that may have questions about this merger, this consolidation, and hopefully we can provide answers that we can't seem to get from the state system currently. I mean, as you discussed already, we still don't know what the name of this new merged entity is yet. We don't know what the program array will be offered. We don't have a final word on athletics and what programs we will have on the 3 campuses with regards to athletic opportunities for our students. And we don't have any specifics or details to actually review yet, even to see if there's good, valuable points to it or, negative aspects that we need to consider. And our concern is that really the devil might be in the details because we have nothing to actually evaluate at this point.
No, I hear this, and look, I look at the state system as I said at the beginning, the jewel of education, because I know a lot of working class kids who have gotten the ability to go to a school that's close by, that had good quality education, and now you're shrinking that down, forcing kids to go miles away from home. It sounds like a really bad thing. So let me go back to you, Dr. Girton, because right now there's a lot of money being put out by the American Rescue Plan. Is there any money coming into the state for higher education? And isn't that what we should be using to kind of help this during this time?
Absolutely, yes. There have been with the rescue plan, there are millions of dollars coming just to Lock Haven with that, but even more coming onto the entire state system. So there's the idea. We've been told, well, there's this COVID crisis and so forth, and well, we can't count on this. It's one-time money. Well, this is a one-time crisis, and so we plan. And Lock Haven itself is planned. We have over $53 million in reserves, so we can weather this. But it really is, the end game. And when I've asked this chancellor, how do you plan to market a school that's going to retrench around 30% of its faculty in 2 years' time? He's basically said, well, we can't afford to keep 14 state-owned comprehensive residential institutions in the state of Pennsylvania. So really what he's looking to do is shrink the system. And when you look at it, he said, well, schools have changed over time. Well, we have, but every change has been oriented toward growth, from being a normal school to a state teachers college to a state college to universities. It's all been targeted with growth. His end game is shrinking this system.
And the way it sounds, creating a couple new entities that has no loyalty, no alumni, no past. So basically just starting new institutions and hoping, they catch on. So let me go to you, Shawn, because this is one of those moments where, I look at this and back to the community angle, the jobs that these communities depend on. This is a massive economic hit. So it seems kind of short-sighted to me to go after and close these places down like this.
It is. It is absolutely short-sighted. Lock Haven is a rural community. The university is a major employer for the community. And if they outsource AFSCME jobs, which is what they're intending on doing, that's the plan, to save money, they will, in theory, be paying less money for the same work, but it won't really be the same work. It will be done by people who don't have the passion, who don't have the drive, who don't have the care for the students that our AFSCME members do. I mean, our AFSCME members go above and beyond. I mean, they've made sure that our campus is safe through this crisis of COVID. They've been there every day, even though most of us can work remotely. They're the ones who are holding the place together, and to just cast them aside and say we can't afford to keep you it's just beyond reasonable. beyond cruel.
Right.
And I don't think it's going to end up saving any money anyway. I think it's a bad decision.
So do you think this is ideological? Because look, this is something that's been going on for years. I go back to the Corbett years, where they were talking about selling off Westchester and doing away with Cheney and really just attacking the system. Is this still part of that? Because I look at this and I want to hold on to these 14 institutions because I do think kids need them. I think working class kids need these opportunities. Do you think it's part of that ideology?
Oh yeah, I do. And Lock Haven, I can speak for Lock Haven. I mean, many of our students are first generation. Many of our students come within the 5-county area. Some of our students have never left Pennsylvania or even left the county. This is their chance. They can commute, or sometimes they can live on campus and get the complete college experience. But if you take away their choices, if you take away their majors, you take away the faculty with the passion and the drive to teach, you don't have anything left but a shell.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. I remember back during the Corbett years, there was a big rally on the Capitol steps, and I was waiting for my turn to speak, and the kid that I met on the steps, I said, what are you doing here? And he goes, well, I'm fighting to keep my school open. He goes, I can't afford the kind of tuition increases that the Corbett administration was proposing, because they were talking about 50% cuts to higher ed. And, he told this story, my grandfather wanted to go to college. It fell through. He went and worked in the mill. His father wanted to go to college. Something happened. He went to work in the mill. He said, look, I don't have a choice because there's no mill to go back to. So I look at these institutions as for some people, their only opportunity to get ahead. So let me go to you, Professor Campbell, because there are going to be those who are going, okay, fine, we're going to have a rally, we're going to have a town hall. What do you think should be done? What's the direction that you're calling for? If not this, then what?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. As a first-generation college student myself, we provide the opportunities for these students to get a college education, and that's why we're here. We have top-class faculty on our campus, top-class staff that are working to give the students the best education possible. And we're going to continue to do that moving forward as well. I think what we're looking for people to do that hear this is to reach out to their state representatives, to reach out to the chancellor, to the members of the board of governors, to the governor himself, and express their concerns about the funding of the state schools in Pennsylvania, and that there needs to be better funding. We're traditionally in the 47th to 50th as state allocation of resources, and I think that needs to improve in order to provide quality educational opportunities to our students in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the rural areas around Lock Haven and Clearfield.
Yeah, I mean, this is a rural issue as much as it is anything else, because a lot of the kids who go to your schools are rural students. Let me go to you, Dr. Girton, because you brought it up a minute ago. Back, and I'm probably right about the same age as you are. Back, in the 80s, the state was picking up a good portion of the tuition. Students were responsible for a quarter of it. Now that dynamic is completely flipped on its head. The states and the local tax base is picking up, what I think you said, less than 25%. And now the students and their families are responsible for the rest. Isn't the failure of if there is a failure of these systems, have to do with the fact that our politicians have failed our families and our students by slashing taxes and destroying the tax base for your institutions?
I think that's certainly a part of it. I think the other part of it is that unfortunately this chancellor has abdicated his responsibility to advocate for the very system that he is employed by. He has only asked the past 2 years for a 2% increase in appropriations. That's frankly just that's a pittance. Especially considering the cut that we took, the 50% cut was, wheedled down to 18%, which was still devastating. We're basically at the same level of appropriations that we were over a decade ago. And so, yes, it's just been a continual slide of disinvestment. But I do want to sort of end a little bit on a positive note. We're fighting to keep the same level of education that we have now. you can still get a great education at Lock Haven University, at Bloomsburg, at Mansfield, Clarion, California, or Edinburgh, or any school in the state system. We're fighting to keep that. And this is a fight I believe we can win. And I would just, I would ask your listeners to follow Save Our State Schools, follow AppScuff, follow our local LHU AppScuff on social media. We have an AppScuff student liaison on Twitter. Follow us, you'll get some good information there, and let's fight for, again, public higher education in this Commonwealth.
No, I'm right there with you, and we'll get links out on how folks can do all of that. Shawn, the rally this Saturday, obviously, a lot of people aren't going to be able to go, especially with the restrictions. How can we help support what you're doing, though?
You can write the governor. You can write your state representatives. You can write the board of governors and tell them that this is a travesty, that there needs to be another way to go, and there is, in fact, another way to go. And before all of this merger and integration happens, if it must happen, and we really hope it doesn't, because we want to keep our institutions, that we need to see the plan. Right. We need to know what's going to happen. At this point, we're flying blind.
I appreciate that. And Peter, real quick, on the 30th, there's the town hall. How do we access that?
We can reach out to Shelley Shank in the AppScuff office at Lock Haven, 570-484-2231, or by email shank@lhup.edu. And you can register for the town hall, and you'll be sent a link to actually participate that evening.
All right. Well, we'll make sure we get some of that stuff out, so hopefully folks will get to it. Folks, I appreciate the time. Keep up the good fight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Crazy. I mean, this is one of those fights that you got to be involved in, because once you lose these institutions, once they go away, they don't come back. This is the fight worth having. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1966. This is the day Chicano labor organizer Cesar Chavez started a 340-mile march from Delano to Sacramento, California. Rights of farm workers. The action had actually started the year before, in 1965. Filipino farm workers had gone on strike against grape growers in California. Their demands were better wages and better working conditions. Cesar Chavez's National Farm Workers Association, a precursor to the United Farm Workers, voted to support the strike. Chavez recognized that in order to be successful, the farm workers would need to bring public attention to the struggle. He called for a grape boycott, sending organizers to big cities to coordinate the effort. Back in California, each day the picketing farm workers would choose different fields for their protests. At one of the largest growers in the Delano area, Shinley, striking workers were intentionally sprayed with agricultural poisons. In protest, the National Farm Workers Association organized the 340-mile march to Sacramento. A small group of about 70 farm workers started out on the march. The organizers worked to create a sense of community on the journey. A theater group performed skits about the farm workers' struggles each evening. Over the next 25 days, hundreds of people joined the procession. As the march grew, it garnered media attention. The marchers walked into Sacramento on Easter Sunday morning. A crowd of 10,000 gathered around the Capitol building. The marchers and their supporters erupted into cheers when Chavez announced that Shinley had agreed to recognize the union. Soon, the other large Delano grower also agreed to recognize the workers' union. These were two major victories, but other growers remained unwilling to compromise. It wasn't until 1970 that the 50,000 farm workers in the Delano grape fields won union contracts. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
There's a white oak tree in Athens, Georgia, that is not owned by anyone. It's an autonomous entity known as the tree that owns itself. Around 1820, the owner of the property wrote a formal deed proclaiming, "In consideration of the great love I bear this tree and the great desire I have for its protection for all time, I convey entire possession of itself and all land within 8 feet of the tree on all sides." Age finally took its toll, though, and a 1942 windstorm downed the tree. Yet its autonomy lives on. Residents took a seedling from the original and planted it in the same spot, and that offspring is still there, known as the son of the tree that owns itself. What if all trees and other natural ecosystems had a legal right to exist, thrive, evolve, and regenerate? This concept of nature existing in its own right as living entities is the essence of a rapidly spreading rights of nature movement. All across our country and around the world, people wake up to find that faraway financial elites have come in by stealth, using legalistic ruses to poison local water, strip forests and fields, defile the air, and otherwise destroy our natural surroundings. But what if the law was balanced to let those natural surroundings have their own say and redress the harm done to them? Just as corporations have lawyers, rivers, forests, etc., could be provided with legal counsel to sue corporations and governments that mindlessly contaminate and even kill them. This idea is taking hold. Last November, a whopping 89% of voters in Orange County, Florida, fed up with decades of industrial pollution of their waterways, shouted yes to a Rights of Nature initiative. This is Jim Hightower saying, to learn more, go to Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, CELDF.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'll tell you, it's really remarkable what has happened in this state over the last 10, 11 years. You go back to the Corbett years and the massive cuts to education. And look, it was happening all during the 90s and early 2000s as well. They kept shifting the costs on to the students and not increasing funding to our higher education institutions. And that's just not Pennsylvania. That's across the country. We gave huge tax cuts to very wealthy people, to big business, and well, we made the poor and the working class shoulder the burden through a lifetime of student loan debt. This has been a massive redistribution of wealth in this country based on education, and it's not just at the higher end. You look at the K through 12. We have underfunded public schools. We have done some of the most insane things, and then expected teachers to pick up the slack. In fact, I know I talk to teachers all the time. They're forever reaching into their own pocket to cover things that the classroom need, or when we were in COVID, and even now, especially now, to cover things that they need. And this is one of those things that is infuriating, especially when you look at the fact that there are so many politicians out there right now who are trying to shame teachers back into the classroom. It's all about the kids. Yeah, it's about the kids, but it's also about keeping yourself safe as well. And here to share some thoughts on that, I've asked Mitchell Robinson to come talk with us. Mitchell is an education blogger, also associate professor of music education at Michigan State University. He blogs over at the Electa blog. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at his most recent work is on just this topic. Stop shaming teachers into reopening schools. Mitchell, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, I'm looking at our state system of higher education. They're talking about merging schools and consolidating and doing a whole bunch of really draconian, nasty stuff, slashing programs and expecting it to work. And it's something that, they've done to K through 12 as well, which is why I think your piece is so important.
Well, thanks. I live with a teacher, and I am friends with lots of teachers, and what's going on right now is just shameful.
Now, the reason I bring it up is there's a part in this, and I got to read it because it is so good. You wrote, you cannot systematically defund public schools for decades, eliminate teaching positions, school nurses, counselors, psychologists, and other support staff from school budgets, and fail to maintain school facilities while simultaneously increasing class sizes, cutting health care and retirement benefits to school employees, lowering standards for who becomes a teacher, increasing the number of charter schools that compete for tax dollars, and implement voucher programs and tax credit schemes that function exactly like vouchers, and then expect public schools to function like well-funded, adequately resourced public institutions. And I would say that's just not for K through 12, that's through higher ed as well. That is one of the best pieces of writing I've come across in a while.
Well, thanks. I think the Venn diagram for people that are trying to train teachers back into schools and the folks that don't want to pass education budgets at the local level and are looking to kind of privatize schools nationally looks pretty much like a circle. So I'm not really I'm not here for the complaints about kind of the wolf whistles about kids' mental health when we've been cutting school psychologists and nurses out of schools for the last 20 years. And when we've hollowed out the curriculum. I happen to be a music teacher in too many schools, especially urban schools. We've taken all the things out of school that really could help kids through a crisis like this, and we've turned the curriculum into pretty much an impoverished system of studies.
Yeah, it's incredible to me that, those things, the humanities have just been ripped out of schools, and it's now a commodity. We've made education a commodity, and that's frightening to me, because you then have you have people who are they're easily led or misled.
Yes, well, I mean, when you turn education into a commodity, then you're turning parents into customers and kids into widgets, and that's just not what education is. That's not why I got into teaching, and it's not why most of my colleagues have got into teaching.
Right, but we're in this moment, and as I said at the beginning, we have all these politicians who are running around saying, we need to reopen the schools. It's you teachers and those unions who don't care about the kids. And I'm saying, do we know it's entirely safe to go into these schools? Do we know it's entirely safe, given the fact that a lot of our schools are crumbling and antiquated, and with horrible ventilation systems? Do we know it's safe to go back? I don't know that we do.
Well, I can speak locally here. In our state, we're seeing a state of surges in coronavirus, partially fueled by new variants from different places. And I know one local school district has 140 kids that are in quarantine right now, but we're supposed to send all of our teachers and children back. And part of it is kind of a scheme by the Michigan GOP, which has set a standard of 20-plus hours a week of in-school, in-person teaching in order to get some promised state aid. So it's really become kind of a game of chicken. If the Republicans in the state legislature are saying, if you go back full-time or 20 hours a week or whatever it is, then you can get the money that we'd already promised you. So what's happening now is teachers and school administrators are having to make really hard decisions. Do we stick with the plan that we had put in place, or do we drastically alter it to get a piece of that state aid? And in most of the school districts that I know of, they are indeed changing all of their plans that have been set in stone and published for weeks and months in order to get the state aid. So you're really putting teachers and students and families between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Now, you also write in your piece about the fact that, the school is basically the dumping ground of all of our problems, from teen pregnancy to racism to, drug abuse, food insecurity, all of that stuff. And I think this pandemic has shown a lot of people who didn't know before just how valuable a local community public school is, especially when you're talking about feeding kids who are food insecure, or as we used to call it back in my day, hungry. Right. This is one of those moments where I'm hoping people are paying attention to stuff outside of the noise of the politicians just, blaming you and blaming teachers for not being back in the classroom.
Well, I think a lot of us have whiplash, how quickly the rhetoric and the narrative has gone from teachers are brilliant and they are doing great public service and they should be paid $1 billion a week, to those lazy union thugs won't go back into school. I've been a union member since I started teaching, I just wish that teachers unions were as strong as a lot of these back to school advocates, back to reopening school advocates think that teachers unions are. When you're against teachers unions, you're against teachers.
Right.
And the thing that teachers unions are trying to do is protect their members. The other thing that gets lost in the wash is that better working conditions for teachers equal better learning conditions for kids. So there's not a single thing that teachers unions are asking school administrators and politicians to do that isn't going to result in a better educational experience for kids.
Do you think it's safe to reopen in this moment? Or do you think it's prudent, given the fact that we're so close to getting people vaccinated, we're so close to maybe seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, that kind of forcing this reopen at the end of the year with all these variants possibly popping around, it just seems really short-sighted to force people back in at this moment.
Well, I'm seeing schools right now that are getting close to spring break and are deciding to send kids back before spring break, and I just don't understand the wisdom of that. When you've got a break coming up, you could avoid two things by holding off until after the break. One, you're waiting until the break and giving people a chance to clean out the schools and for people to be out of school for a longer period of time. Secondly, when those people are leaving for spring break, I'm seeing uncomfortable numbers of people congregating in places that look like super spreader events to me. And I shudder to think what's going to happen when all those people come back from spring break in Florida and South Carolina, where they're gathered together in large numbers, and then we think schools are these places where kids are going to come and everything's going to be just fine. So I think schools will be safe to open up when proper mitigation protocols are put in place. But as somebody who's been teaching for over 40 years, I have very little confidence in our public school system, which, as you pointed out, has been defunded to have the kind of resources that we need to make sure that schools are safe.
Yeah, it just seems to me, again, you hear about policemen, being the dumping ground for all of our societal problems, but it's first it's in the schools. And if we had better resources and more adequate resources to deal with problems at the beginning, maybe we don't have policemen who have they're ultimately the dumping ground, and our prisons are doing all of our mental health treatments and all of these problems. Maybe if we started at the beginning with the things we know work, smaller class sizes, better resources, all of the things that I've had professionals like you tell me work. Maybe if we tried that would be a better situation.
Well, I don't think it's a mistake that we've seen a lot of rhetoric about defunding the police and reforming education, when what we really need to do is reform the police and refund education.
So, I go back to this moment because clearly we've got these politicians who are pushing heavily, and I've got, listeners who have said, that we should just go back because the kids are going to be okay. Because there's this belief out there, and maybe you've got a thought on this, that there's the belief out there that, kids are young, they're resilient, they've got healthy immune systems, they're going to be just fine.
Well, I would point to one of my educational heroes, John Dewey. And Dewey talked about public schools as places that needed to be places and spaces of integrity and good faith for everyone that worked in them. And, I'm a parent. I have two kids. I've been a teacher for 40 years. I like kids. I love kids. I love my students. But schools are not places just for children. They're also places for teachers and for custodians and for school lunch workers and for bus drivers and administrators and maintenance workers. And if we're not taking care of all of those people and those persons that work at schools, we aren't really doing our job as a public school system. So I have my doubts that all children are going to walk through this unscathed, but I'm really concerned with my colleagues that work out in the K-12 schools. I'm concerned about all the people that work in schools as secretaries and clerks, and often who are not protected by unions. And I'm worried about the health and safety of our communities if all these people are forced to go back to schools before they are safe. Schools have multiple functions. schools have a custodial function where we agree as a public school system to take care of children during the day, and they also have an educational function where we agree that we're going to teach them things. I think right now, what we've shown a light on is that schools are just about the only place that parents have to turn to for that custodial function. And I think it's shining a very bright light on failings in child care and on failings on family leave policies and health care. And what I'm hoping is that it's going to shine a bright light on how important schools are for creating strong communities. And if we get through this, which I hope we will, that we'll come to revalue what we can do for public schools and for our communities together.
No, I'm right there with you. But what do you? Again, I come back to this moment where I'm thinking of a conversation I had with with someone I know who said, "Look, the kids have lost a year and a half of education. They're not going to get that back. We got to get them back into school as fast as possible so that they can catch up." Do you have faith that the kids who have missed a year, who have gone through this, are going to be in a similar position that they would have been otherwise, in some short order, or is this going to be a build over a number of years to catch them up?
Well, I'll say first, I'm a lot more worried about losing a single colleague or a single child than I am about learning loss. I would also point out that anyone that talks about learning loss or days of learning is someone that has never taught anyone anything, because you don't measure learning in days. You don't measure it in months. So have we lost things? Of course we've lost things. Our whole society has lost things. But I think what children need right now is, if we're going to get back to school, what they need is to re-socialize. They need to see their friends. They need to spend time with other people outside of their home. That's one of the real functions and benefits of public education. They become, to Betsy DeVos's great horror, centers of community life. What I also think is, and I would agree with my friend Nicholas Campbell, is that what children need this summer is not summer school and more scripted curriculum and standardized tests, but they need a summer of play outside with their friends when it's safe, because we've lost that for a year. So we've lost a lot of things. And as a teacher, it may sound a little bit weird to hear me say this, but among the least of my worries is learning loss.
I can hear heads exploding, but I'm right on board with you. I think getting out and being amongst them for their friends and the socialization and all of that stuff is more important. It's the whole reason that we bought I bought my kid an Xbox so that he could play video games with his friends and at least have. I'm not a video game person, but at least they have that socialization of being able to do that together.
Right.
Because we're living in very bizarre times. So last question I've got for you. So when you hear these politicians, when you hear people, throw this shaming out there, what response do you want people to have to it? Because look, I've got people who have thrown this up to me. What response would you throw back at them?
Well, I would say first of all that I really do understand the tension that parents, especially of young children, have if they're needing to get out of the home to get to their jobs, and they don't have places for the kids. I totally get that. Our kids were young at one point, and I can only imagine how I would have felt if my kids weren't, 17 and 20 as they are now. So the tension is real, but I hope that people will understand that no one wants to get back to school more than teachers. My wife is a teacher. I'm a teacher. If you want to talk about loss, we have lost an important part of our identities as teachers for the past year. No one wants to get back into the classroom more than teachers. I miss the interaction in the classroom. I miss watching my students grow. So I understand the loss. But what I'm really concerned about is if we send teachers back into schools, or custodians or bus drivers back into school settings on crowded buses, in school classrooms that can't observe 6 feet of distance because they just don't have the resources or the number of faculty to do it, I'm worried about losing colleagues. I'm worried about losing children, and I'm worried about the loss to our society by pushing people back into jobs that aren't safe yet to do.
I'm right there with you, Mitchell. I appreciate the time and really a great piece. I hope folks will take a look at it. I think it's important that we stop shaming teachers. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at that. Also, check out the writings of Mitchell Robinson at mitchellrobinson.net. We'll get those links out as well. Mitchell, it was really great talking with you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Should we open up, fling the doors wide open, and let the consequences be damned, or is Mitchell right? We don't want to lose a single teacher or a single custodian when we will get through this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1960. That was the day 5 Italian immigrant workers were killed in Toronto, Ontario, in what is known as the Hogs Hollow tragedy. Referred to as sand hogs, workers sought to connect a pumping station to the water distribution network. They were building a water main in a tunnel under the Don River. The project was already far behind schedule and over budget. Workers were welding in a compression chamber when smoke began to overwhelm the main shaft. Some workers made it out. Firefighters were prevented from releasing water into the tunnel to extinguish the fire over concerns that it would cause a collapse. In addition, there was no backup safety equipment at street level. The tragedy shed light on the appalling wage and working conditions immigrant workers faced just outside the city's borders. The persistent public outcry prompted exposés and investigations that revealed just how bad conditions were. It was truly a tale of two cities. Within the city, union requirements guaranteed breaks and enforcement of safety regulations. But just outside, it was a different story. According to Jamie Bradburn, who wrote for the Toronto Historicist in 2010, workers on suburban projects faced conditions that included lack of proper sanitation, poor safety inspections, illegal withholding of vacation pay, unpaid overtime, checks that often bounced, and groundless threats of deportation. The coroner's inquest determined that callous management, incompetent foremen, inexperienced workers, a disorganized rescue, and inefficiency at the Department of Labor caused the disaster. Though no criminal charges were ultimately laid, the sacrifice of the 5 men at Hogs Hollow brought about improvements in the conditions that had led to their demise.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So prosecutors in California suing the largest chain of senior living communities, Brookdale Senior Living. I think there's one in our neighborhood. They are nationwide. They are massive. Evidently, there was a lawsuit filed by California's Attorney General and other prosecutors as well against Brookdale because they were manipulating their rating system. And this, again, is another one of those moments where, sorry, but the Republican view, the conservative view of, just let corporations police themselves. They'll do the right thing. They're good corporate citizens. Obviously, they fudged the numbers to get a better rating. They pressured people within their organization to lie, to make things up so that they would get a better rating. Why? So they could charge more money. And this isn't hard to figure out. It really isn't. And if you didn't have a cop on the beat, you'd probably do it too, which again is why I look at all of these schemes that my pro-business conservative friends throw at me of, just let corporations, we don't need those stinking regulations. We don't need any of those regulators. They're just crooks. They kill jobs. And yet, you look at, time and time again, corporate America, as often as you look into it. And the problem is how many people keep looking into it. And this is a roll the dice moment. They got away with it for years, and finally someone noticed. And chances are, here's what's going to happen. I think we already know the outcome of this. You don't need to be very bright to figure it out. They'll pay a small little fine. They'll promise never to do it again. Maybe they'll sign a consent decree that, oh my goodness, we'll have a little bit of oversight for a short period of time, and they'll be on their best behavior until it goes away, and then they'll go right back to what they were doing before. And then another little slap on the wrist. Oh, don't do it again. They'll pay a couple of lobbyists to go in and smooth something over, and it'll be fine. And this again is another one of these things that I look at this company and those like them. For years here where I'm at in the center part of Pennsylvania, for years I've worked with different unions as county nursing homes were being sold off. As they were saying, well, we can sell it to this private company and they'll run it better because it's what they do. And then all this private company comes and does is crushes the union, slashes the wages, eliminates retirement security, and makes the healthcare basically either unaffordable or just plain crap, and pockets the difference. And then you end up having those people who were making, a reasonable living, moving on to somewhere else. And then you end up with a second tier person working in those facilities. Not because there's anything wrong with them, but because they don't have the training, they don't have the experience. And then there's a high turnover. And you end up having nurse shortages. You end up having all of the problems that come along with the low wage, really low wage, bottom low wage workforce. Because if the employer doesn't have the dignity, doesn't give the employee dignity and respect to pay them a reasonable wage, what makes you think the employee is going to give them the dignity and respect of showing up all the time? The second they get another nickel and they're chasing nickels for somewhere else, they go. And who suffers? The patients suffer. This isn't rocket science. You don't need to be a genius to figure this out. Now, when the counties owned them, there were regulations in place. You had to have a certain nurse to patient ratio. There were inspections all the time. They did a great job of ensuring that there was a minimum level of care. And then it's the Wild West. It's off to private land, and it's off to slashing wages and breaking unions and well, this. Now they've falsified their payroll journals. They've done a whole bunch of things that are, again, going to get them a little slap on the wrist. And they will. A little slap on the wrist. But in the meantime, how many people are suffering and struggling because of it? How many of these seniors are not being changed? Now, look, here's the thing. I go back to, and this is where my experience was. My mother was one of the low wage nurse assistants back in the 70s. She worked at a nursing home that was in walking distance of our housing project. And I remember being in that nursing home, and it was sadly just a warehouse for poor people. The patients were sad. I mean, you think about, the bed sores, and you think about, the fact that they didn't have the staffing levels. And through the 70s and into the early 80s, they did a good job of fixing that stuff, of taking them over and remaking them with good regulation. And then you get to the 2000s where it's all, hey, let's sell them off. Let's dump them. We can get some money for it to fill the budget gaps that we have because we've been cutting taxes for the very wealthy and for corporations. We got to find money somewhere. It's the same thing we've done with our parking authorities. It's the same thing we've done with our water systems, with our sewer systems. It's the same thing we've done with our turnpikes all across the country. It's what we have done with everything that used to be ours, that used to be the commons. The things that we, the people, built and controlled, we sold off for short-term profit, just to fill a budget gap because, well, again, we gave corporations and the wealthy huge amounts of tax breaks to entice them to come build their building or build something or do something that they were going to do anyway. So this is disgraceful to me. But again, not surprising. So when people go, Rick, why are you a supporter of regulations? I'm a supporter of protections for workers, for consumers, for people. Do I like onerous regulation? No. But for every regulations on the books, there's a story that got it there. Someone's life was affected. Someone died because of that. And I was talking to public sector workers here in Pennsylvania. And I said, it was just today. I was talking to 4 people who were newly hired in a public sector workspace. And I said, one of the reasons that you join a union as a public sector worker is because you do not have any federal or state OSHA protections as a public sector worker. You have nothing. And I tell the story about Jake Schwab. Jake Schwab was a bus mechanic out in Erie, Pennsylvania. Unfortunate accident happened. He was killed on the job, and it is a really bizarre story of the company not having the right equipment to do the job that he needed to do. They used an airbag to try and lift the bus a little bit higher to get the thing that they needed underneath it. The airbag exploded, shot a piece of metal into his head, and killed him. Had it not been for his union, no one would ever have known the name of Jake Schwab. Nobody would have investigated it. Nobody would have looked into it at all. Nobody would have known why. The police wouldn't have said a word because, hey, he was killed on the job. No problem. And there's nobody to investigate the hows, the whys, and how to prevent it in the future. The only people that do that are your union. And that's why public sector union workers should be joining unions, and all workers should. But when you slash these kind of regulations and there's no cop on the beat, you end up with bad things that happen. And that's always been my view. So the right talks about job-killing regulations. I talk about a people-killing lack of regulation. That's simple to me. Love to hear your thoughts. Should we be selling off our county nursing homes? I guess that's happening somewhere in our listening area. I got an email from someone saying, hey, our county's doing it. I guess Cumberland County, there's talk of selling off one of the county nursing homes. If you've got information, I'd love to hear it. Rick@thericksmithshow.com. Bad idea. I don't care. It's a bad idea to hand off to profiteers. We've seen this movie over and over and over again, and not surprisingly, it never ends up good. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
She is the first Native American to hold a cabinet position in U.S. history.
Senate confirms Representative Deb Haaland's historic nomination as Interior Secretary.
Tonight, growing frustration for tens of thousands in Jackson, Mississippi.
Still without clean water 1 month after winter storm. Democrats turn to crafting massive infrastructure bill with a focus on climate resilience, plus an unexpected switch. February 2021 was the 16th warmest February ever recorded globally.
So it wasn't that warm?
It was not.
That is a switch. All of those twists and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Building roads and bridges and water supply systems and the rest has always been bipartisan, except when they oppose it with the Democratic president, as they did under President Obama, and we had to shrink the package.
And shrinking Obama's package is no easy feat. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, where are we starting here today?
The historic confirmation of Democratic Representative Deb Haaland of New Mexico as U.S. Secretary for the Department of the Interior. The U.S. Senate confirmed her appointment on Monday by a vote of 51 to 40. 4 Republicans voted to confirm Haaland, with Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski casting the deciding vote amid strong pressure from Alaska's tribal communities. Haaland is the first Native American in U.S. history to lead any cabinet agency. Her confirmation legislation was greeted with cheers and tears in Indian country. The American Petroleum Institute congratulated Holland, despite literally giving Republicans opposition research, including bogus oil industry-backed studies, to defeat Holland's confirmation.
Of course they did.
In other news, February 2021 was the 16th warmest February ever recorded globally since record-keeping began in the 1880s. That's according to NOAA. And that's thanks in large part to the record winter freeze of Arctic air that enveloped most of the continental U.S. last month and knocked out water and power in 11 states. It was so massive it dragged down the overall global average for February for the first time in more than a decade, even as many other regions of the planet were warmer than average.
And the irony here is that it was part of climate change that resulted in the polar vortex sliding off the Arctic down into the U.S.
Well, that is an emerging area of science, although there is some disagreement about it.
Well, I disagree with the disagreement.
Speaking of that record freeze, residents of Jackson, Mississippi are still struggling without clean drinking water nearly a month after the freeze. Enough water pressure has returned to the city's systems to flush toilets, but it still cannot be used for bathing, drinking, or cooking, as much of the city is still under boil water notices with no end in sight. Jackson officials say the city's brittle infrastructure, already failing even before the storm, will require hundreds of millions of dollars to repair.
Well, as I understand it, help may be on the way from Joe Biden's relief bill.
Yes, it is true. There is a down payment of $100 million for state and local governments to begin repairing their critical infrastructure systems. Also in need of repair, the nation's dams, bridges, and levees. U.S. infrastructure got an overall grade of C- in the latest report card from the American Society of Civil Engineers. But the civil engineers gave stormwater infrastructure, dams, and levees a D grade, which is especially concerning as heavier precipitation caused by climate change is straining the nation's aging flood control systems.
I wish someone would make America's infrastructure great again.
The engineers' latest survey estimates it will cost nearly $6 trillion over the next 10 years to bring roads, bridges, and airports to a safe and sustainable level. That's about double what governments and the private sector currently spend.
Well, we can't afford safe and sustainable airports.
And, as you've mentioned, now that President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID economic rescue legislation was passed by congressional Democrats with 0 Republican votes, now the Biden administration and Democrats have begun laying the groundwork for another new bill to repair and upgrade the nation's decrepit infrastructure after decades of deferred maintenance have made critical U.S. systems vulnerable to the increasing frequency of extreme weather events that have been intensified by man-made climate change. A new Data for Progress poll has found 67% of voters, including 61% of Republicans, believe that we need an additional Build Back Better infrastructure package. Only 22% of voters were opposed. Finally, some good news. The Biden administration has rescinded the Trump administration's approval of a permit in Arizona that would have allowed global mining giant Rio Tinto to build a huge, controversial copper mine on sacred Apache territory known as Oak Flat, which the Trump administration rammed through despite an executive order that had protected the area from mining for more than 50 years.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Joe sent me an email during the break correcting me from earlier. I said it was Ohio that their attorney general was going after the American Rescue Plan because they wanted to cut taxes. Turns out, according to Joe, he's not alone. Evidently, 21 Republican state attorneys general they are threatening to sue, threatening to take action. It's only the guy from Ohio, and where I was right, Ohio is suing, but there are 21, I guess, that are threatening to sue. That is a big thing. And again, I'm all in favor of saying, no, you have to use the money for this, and this. You cannot take money that is made to help the economy recover and give it away to rich people. Sorry, just can't do it. But here to share some thoughts on, well, what's the matter with Ohio? I've asked our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney, to come share some thoughts. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
So your Attorney General, Yost, I believe his name is, right?
Dave Yost.
He is suing because, as I understand this, they want to cut taxes.
Right, they'll be up to, well, it's what they're saying one thing, and then there's another that's the reality. So 21 Republican state attorneys general on, I think it was yesterday, on Tuesday, are saying they're going to take action. Now, Yost has, I think fired the first shot, as far as I know, about, filing the lawsuit. And what they're saying is that because the recovery bill does not allow the payment, receiving state payments, which is in the bill for states, and it doesn't allow for them to then cut taxes and take that revenue pot and replace the tax cuts with that revenue pot.
Of course not.
So, right. So, but you see what's out in the news media is the fact that basically that the stimulus package is not allowing for tax cuts. That's not accurate. The stimulus package doesn't say you can't cut taxes. It just simply says you can't cut taxes and then take that money out of the stimulus pot that the state gets.
Right.
So I don't think they're going to win in court. But when you look at the lawsuit and how the media has handled, the actual, wording on it, it really doesn't give the reality. Doesn't what it's done, Rick, is says, well, the stimulus bill doesn't allow for the states to cut taxes, and that's just not accurate.
No, they can cut all the taxes they want. They just can't take the money that we're
Correct.
using to help fund schools and food banks and people to stay in their jobs and unemployment and all of those things to give as a pass-through to rich people and corporations. Sorry, that's just stupid.
Well, also, if we look at historically, I was thinking about this today of different federal measures that, when I was in Congress we were on and then we passed into the states. If you look at those measures historically, they have always come along with certain stipulations. You can't take, for example, federal highway dollars and throw them into a rainy day fund for a state, right?
Right.
You can't take federal highway dollars and put it into a pot to replace tax revenue that was cut. So this is not unusual. It's just a lot of media hype, obviously, over 21 state attorneys going to potentially sue the Biden administration. Why would you want to be able? I mean, think about it for a second. Why would you want to be able to take one pot of money, cut taxes, and replace it with federal money?
Well,
if you're going to cut taxes, you cut it out of the state budget, and nothing would prevent this in this bill if they want to cut it and find their own revenue source to take it from.
Yeah, but and look, I know you were a Republican for a very long time, and I think you had the tax cut fetish for a while you were in Congress.
When appropriate, right?
It seems to me that the only club that they have in the bag, the only arrow in the quiver, is it always reverts back to tax cuts. And can we agree that over the last 40 years we've realized that cutting taxes on the wealthy and corporations hasn't done what we were led to believe it was going to do?
Well, I mean, in some cases it hasn't. I mean, there were things I think that did help. For example, when you had the family farm and they were calling small farms estates, and you practically had to sell the farm, the family farm, to pay the government. I think there were certain things that over time that were okay, and I remember certain tax revenues we had bipartisan support. But the problem I had for years with the Republicans, they were I used to call it tax gaga. I mean, everything was reduce taxes and go campaign on that. And there were other things to campaign on. In a lot of cases, the statistics showed that, in fact, we didn't win with public approval on some of the tax decreases.
Yeah, but here's the thing: we've that tax fetish, Reagan forward, created the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. We've now got Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, who are, wealthier than imaginable because
and
of
Amazon, except for, and I sent a correction to you because I did make a mistake on your show last month, except for a couple of years, Amazon paid nothing, which is not right. You're right. There were loopholes. Amazon paying nothing for quite a few years had obviously a disproportionate effect on making Bezos quite rich as a multi-billionaire, and other people had to pay the price.
Yeah, I mean, but you go back, the day before Reagan took office, Jeff Bezos would be, in the 70% tax rate. Now, he wouldn't be paying that, obviously, but he'd be paying a whole lot more than nothing.
And, I think some of the tax decreases came back to haunt, no question about it. And in this case, they're making a case for something that doesn't exist. And again, I think that part of the problem with Republicans is they think everything is based on tax decreases, and that's how you win the elections. And again, I argued this years back. Statistics and polling showed, people say, "Oh, thank you," and then they move on. It's not a winning number for the Republicans as much as they think it is.
No, and look, if you cut taxes the way I think you should, I think it is a winning opportunity. You cut taxes on people who are working for a living. You make their lives better, put more cash in their pockets. I'm in favor of that. The problem is we never, those tax cuts don't really happen. And I know the rich pay all the taxes. The rich are the responsible for all that. Yeah, because they've got all the money.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get any easier than that for me. But I was interested to see this. We'll see where it goes, and I hope you're right. I hope they do lose. I wanted to get your thoughts on Russia. The director of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence pushed out this release. I guess the day before yesterday. Russia was involved in 2020. The Russian Foreign Ministry pulled back their ambassador today. Where's this going?
I'm not sure it goes anywhere in a sense that that they can really pinpoint. I mean, there is the intel report that they tried to help Trump in the 2020 election, and I'm just not sure who's going to take it and run with it and try to get down to the bottom of it. They're saying in the report that Putin authorized, quote, influence operations aimed at denigrating President Biden's candidacy and the Democratic Party supporting Trump. And it goes on to talk about undermining. And this is one of the biggest comprehensive looks at this issue by the intel community in quite a long time. So I guess, when you look at it, Russia once again was interfering in elections. They don't say in there that there's evidence of vote fraud perpetrated by Russia, but influence peddling by Russia. Where does it go from here? I don't know, Rick, because, what do they do? I think they've already put sanctions on them. I'm not sure where they can go with it.
Yeah. Now, for me, the idea of we've got to get something passed through. I would like to see something like H.R. 1 go through. I'm curious, look, if we don't do something about the filibuster, it's dead on arrival. But I'm curious your thoughts on H.R. 1 because, look, you were someone who, were instrumental. I think you helped write the Help America Vote Act. What are your thoughts on H.R. 1?
Well, actually, Help America Vote Act was my bill. I was the prime author of it, and Steny Hoyer, who's now the number 2 Democratic member in the House, was my co-sponsor. And let me throw out the next 2 names of my Senate sponsors. This will make people say, you got to be kidding me. Ted Kennedy and a guy named Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
How about that? We actually got the bill put together with broad support. And it was a bill that, with the Help America Vote Act, that established the Federal Elections Commission. And I think with H.R. 1, they'll need to fine-tune parts of it because you don't want that federal commission to be able to implement rules and regulations. You don't want something in the process for as the bill goes for that to happen. But I think it's a good time to take a second look at everything that's going on and how to have obviously make it easier to vote and more difficult to cheat is the goal. That was the goal of Help America Vote Act. And now I think as times change and you have new issues, they ought to take a second look at it.
Yeah. Finally, I wanted to get your thoughts on this this Monmouth University poll that came out that said that something like I think the numbers were like 53% of people think there should be an independent commission created to investigate the riot. But 59% of people said that they wanted an independent commission to investigate all of the, the claims that Trump and Rudy Giuliani and the rest of them were making over voter fraud. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't. Look, this was a high profile series of accusations. Now, I think today, Rick, there was a Pennsylvania issue, and I didn't get to see the entire news story, but where once again something was being accused of happening in Pennsylvania, and it was found no, it wasn't. And so you're still seeing these even today. But it doesn't surprise me that people want it looked into because of the fact that bizarre statements were made. Giuliani was out front more than anyone, with all of this, and with what happened and how it ended up. I think people want to know, who exactly said what, why, and how.
Yeah, I mean, is there any way to go back to, because I look at what happened here in Pennsylvania, and just like 40 minutes from where I sit in Gettysburg, you had Doug Mastriano, the senator here. You had the majority leader in the Senate, Kim Ward. You had all of the top Republicans of the state holding that kangaroo court down in that hotel in Gettysburg.
Right.
Where you had Rudy come in and I'm not sure if Sidney Powell was there, but they had Trump on the phone and they had all these people telling these fanciful stories, none of them under oath, none of them in any way held to the truth, but they held this little kangaroo court of all these wild tales that were unproven and unfounded. Is there any way to hold them accountable for this stuff?
I don't know if they can, but I guess one of the best attempts to shed light on this would be to have some type of independent commission that at least puts the facts out there of what they did, because I think the thrust of this poll of what people answered boils down to people in this poll want to know what was said. This is before the Capitol attack. They want to know about it too, but what was said that destabilized the entire system, that this went on and on and on. And I'll give you an example. How many motions were made in court? And I'd ask this question. How many motions were made in court that when they got into the court, they actually didn't present the facts?
Right.
They presented them to the press. They got into the court. Now, usually in the legal terms, that's called frivolous suits. Why wasn't something done about that? So I think that the people, overall, the majority of people want to take a look into it, and they probably feel an independent commission could get down to the bottom of it a lot more than maybe a commission or something instituted in the House or the Senate at this point.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of it. Look, and I said the same thing about I'm big on transparency. I've had people say, well, you wanted to investigate Trump, and we should be investigating Obama. I'm like, yeah. I want to know why Obama didn't do anything during 2016. I want to know what they knew, what came in, and why they didn't make certain decisions. Absolutely. I open it up. I'm not on anyone's side here. I want truth. I want transparency, and I want accountability. And if independent commission is going to get us there, that's where we go. And I want to know who owns those 17 or 20 or 50 laptops that kept popping up during the election.
Right. And I think if they put all these statements together and take a good hard look at them, and again, I just use the example of them going into court and not actually filing what they said they were going to file. Why were they allowed to do that and get the publicity on it and get people stirred up for no particular reason?
Yep.
I'm not holding my breath on anybody having accountability on this, because I'm still holding my breath, trying to see why there's no accountability on the people that lied to the Congress to get us into a war. So,
No, I'm right there with you. And look,
maybe
there's
they
another
could
thing.
make this one happen.
No, and this is why I think that I'm hoping someone holds Trump accountable. I'm not holding, again, not like you, not holding my breath. But I think you have to break this cycle of, well, let sleeping dogs lie.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's scary. It's just wrong. But Bob, I appreciate the time
Thank
as
you.
always. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick.
Our good friend Bob Ney. No, look, at the end of this, I want open, transparent. I want accountability. more than anything. So if having these public hearings would help, I'm in favor of it. I want the sanctity of that ballot box to be unquestioned. I want people to have faith. Our system doesn't work. Our system does not work if every election cycle the person who loses turns and says, I was cheated. That there's something wrong with the mechanism of the system. Now, did the Russians, get involved in stuff and do a bunch of messaging and do a bunch of, put out a bunch of memes and seek, to tear us apart? Absolutely. And social media has been the number one perpetrator of that, Facebook especially. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten something from someone and you go, where did you find this? Because it's nowhere near reality. And one of my favorite, memes, is, one of the, it's either a picture of Jesus or a picture of Confucius with the line, I didn't effing say that. Because there's so many of those quotes and there's facts, quote unquote facts out there that aren't true, that people just buy into. I'll tell you, I trust nothing that comes off of Facebook. Nothing at all. What I see coming out of Twitter, it had better be a reputable source. And I mean one that is recognizable. I want AP. I want a mainstream media source. I don't want Joe's blog. Those are usually opinions. I'll read it, and then I'll think about it, and I'll try and find some corroborating, stories. But we've gone for too long based off of, Joe wrote this. Sounds reasonable. I heard that on Facebook. And this is where we've gotten. We've gotten to this place where we're in polar opposite camps. And if you believe one thing, I have to believe the opposite. And I've never been in that world. A couple of years ago, I had somebody ask me, so what are you? I was handing out brochures on a line for a candidate. And they go, well, where are you? And I said, well, let me think about that. I'm a green conservative liberal libertarian. And he looked at me like, what do you mean? I go, I mean, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. I'll consider everyone's thoughts. There's some things the Greens believe in that I believe in. There's some things that supposedly conservatives believe in that I believe in. Same thing with the liberals. I have a lot of liberal leanings and thoughts, and I have a lot of libertarian ideas. Leave me the hell alone is one of them. I'm with you. I don't know that you can put yourself into one ideological camp and be as I say all the time, I don't agree with myself 100% of the time. How am I going to agree with a politician or anyone else? Which is why we have discussions, why we have debate, and why we can't be closed-minded. And what's happened is, well, there are people out there from funding, we can argue where it comes from, who want us to believe that we can only be in polar opposite camps and that we have to bomb each other. It's interesting. Bob points out the Help America Vote Act had Teddy Kennedy and Mitch McConnell, the farthest left, and what he's become, what McConnell's become. That's an era long gone by. And the fact that nothing's going to get done in the Senate because you don't have people who feel that they can work together. We're in a very bizarre moment. And again, I blame us. And as soon as we can start talking to each other again, we can start arguing again in a way that we're not going to end up shooting each other, things aren't going to change. Which is why every other Sunday we do our Q&A over at ThinkSpot, and I hope folks will check that out. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.